Hello folks, it's back to the Grey Knight footage for this one because we're going down quite a painful memory lane and I need something nice for my eyeballs to look at whilst I read this. If you like what I do, the subscribe button is down below, please help me out. We are on our way to 15,000 subscribers by the end of the year. Hopefully, if you like what I do, maybe help out. And if you are getting some models over the next few weeks or months on the run up to Christmas, then make sure you use the promo code Northern Exile down below over at Composite Games. They are an amazing, amazing bunch of folks over there, doing a lot to help people out in the hobby who can't afford it anymore, thanks to Games Workshop. But they're doing their bit over there, so if you are getting any models, or you want to get into some model building, then use the promo code down below, get yourself 5% off at checkout, and enjoy Christmas, alright? Cool. This one's going to be a bit of a long one if I don't, measure myself carefully here. Measure myself? Sounds weird. Anyway, moving on. This is a video about Creative Assembly and Games Workshop and how nowadays they are exactly the same company almost, and that is terrible. So this is something I've been boiling around in my head for quite a while, because I've recently finished a playthrough of Rome Total War, and it is without doubt the one of my favourite games of all time. That and Shogun 2 are probably my two most favourite strategy games of all time. And I couldn't help but feel sad when I was finished with my Carthage campaign. I couldn't help but sit back and look at the empire I'd created, and I thought, wow, this used to feel really good. This used to feel awesome, and it still does. But why aren't I going to... I'm not going to see this anymore. It's gone. And why is it gone? And so I got to thinking. And when I got to thinking, I got to writing. And when I got to writing, I thought, well, now I've got to read this out on a video, or I'm going to waste my time. So, here we go. For the longest time, I was, and to be honest, I still am, a Warhammer fan. A big fan of Warhammer, as you all know. Those of you who are old hats to the channel will know that my time in the Warhammer hobby almost came to an end when I worked for the company that makes it, Games Workshop. And my time there almost poisoned this hobby that I love forever. It was not a great experience. It was an experience of constant stress, constant pressure from above to meet unreasonable targets, constant infighting, and employee toxic politics to climb the corporate ladder, all at the expense of the hobby that we all love. Some of you, well, sometimes as well, you don't want to see how the sausage is made. Put it that way. Alright? Only when I distanced the hobby, quote-unquote, from the company, quote-unquote, and through a lengthy rehabilitation on this channel, by you lot, did I reclaim my love for Warhammer, and that was a slow process. So that story has a happy ending, but for the longest time, this is what Warhammer fans have had to do. Separate the company that makes their favourite thing from their favourite thing. That's how bad Games Workshop have been, just to put it into context. Now I know I'm preaching to the choir with a lot of you, but I think I need... If somebody from Total War sees this from their community, they may need a bit of an insight to who I am, what my past is, and maybe why I'm coming to the conclusions that I've come to. Alright? Alright, moving on. So now, we are doing the same with Creative Assembly. Another one of my early loves. I credit Total War with being the sole reason I got into ancient history in the first place. It is the thing that spurred me to check out university courses to see if there was anywhere where I could indulge in ancient history and classics and learn more about this thing that I had been playing for hundreds of hours. I ended up being accepted to Durham University after jumping through a load of hoops and fought my way to the table there. I then went into teaching history and classics before finally teaching privately and starting my own YouTube channel. All based on my love of history that was nurtured by these games. All of this was traced back to Rome Total War, and, to a lesser but still profound extent, its mods and Medieval 2 Total War. Without Total War, I can say this. This channel would not be here. I know I don't cover Total War a lot, But where I am in life now, if you trace it all back to its origins of my passions and what I love, it starts with Rome Total War. That's why I hold Creative Assembly and the Total War franchise in such high esteem, or I used to. They're like a friend who's lost their way. When Total War Warhammer was announced, unlike many others, I was filled with a sense of dread. Creative Assembly, the people who make Total War, have been flagging in terms of quality game building for years at this point. After reaching their zenith with their absolute masterpiece that is Shogun 2 Total War, the Total War series has lurched from buggy mess to disaster with Empire Total War, Napoleon, a return to form after working out the kinks of the original, of course, Rome 2 Total War, Attila, another return to form after working out some kinks, a pattern is emerging here, and others. Although Empire did come before Shogun, but bear with me. Through their own negligence, laziness, and corporate downbeating, Creative Assembly had fallen from the giddy heights of Shogun 2 to Rome 2, a game that killed Total War in my eyes. You have to remember what brought me here in the first place, Rome Total War and Ancient History. Seeing that bastardized, chopped up for DLC, and released in such a broken state made my blood boil and turned me away from Creative Assembly as a company forever. I have never forgiven or forgotten this betrayal. Every game I have of Creative Assemblies I have bought from CD keys years later for a frankly laughable 85+% discount since. I remember videos from people like Voland and his friend back in the day, although I don't remember his friend's name, forgive me, where they had a normal battle on the campaign map when Rome 2 launched, and they were pumped to see Rome 2. You could just sense the excitement as they dived into it, only for their hopes to be dashed live on stream. They had a normal battle on the campaign map, a multiplayer campaign, that had a flag to take in the middle of it. Why? I don't know. I don't know why the flag was there, it was just there. One army is almost annihilated, but they hold the flag still because the victorious army has not taken it yet. The army being beaten literally has 8 dudes left, while the enemy chases them from the field. The timer runs out, and the 8 dudes win the battle as their side still holds the flag, despite being only 8 warriors left from an army of thousands against an army that still has thousands of men chasing them from the field. This is what Rome 2 was, and I always remember their disbelieving laughter when that occurred live on stream. You could sense the second-hand embarrassment that they had been really, really looking forward to this particular game, and no amounts of patching or fixing has mended the issue for me in that Rome 2 Total War at its core is still simply a poor game. Despite the patches, despite everything, it's simply a poor game compared to Rome and compared to Shogun 2. So, you can imagine my trepidation and unease when Creative Assembly, to right this ship, to correct their course, got into bed with Games Workshop of all people. I won't bore you with what came next in exhaustive detail. It is the kind of obvious in hindsight what was coming, let's be honest. Creative Assembly chopped yet more of their games into downloadable content, carving up the content of the Warhammer world and stretching it out to farm as much money from their audience as possible. The rough edges and frankly appalling state of their engine was masked by bombastic spells and giant flying monsters that reduced Total War to an exercise of sending your forces forwards, clicking a few ability buttons, and watching 2 massive blobs of oddly shaped monsters awkwardly slap each other until one falls over. When we were told that Warhammer would in fact be a trilogy, I knew Total War, this thing that I loved, was dead. What we were seeing now was its corpse being paraded around by Creative Assembly to farm the Warhammer market, a new glummet of people to be taken advantage of and nickel and dime for everything that they were worth. They abandoned historical Total War years ago, guys. It's not just happened. This happened years ago. The minute they decided to do Warhammer Historical Total War was dead. Why? Because they were sick of playing with us. They were sick of nickel and diming us. They knew we were done with their bullshit. And so instead of fixing their bullshit like they did in Shogun 2, they did it once before. Empire came out broken and buggy. Then they did Shogun 2. They righted the ship. But they didn't the second time round. This time they said, fuck you and your historical games. Let's go and farm another fan base. Let's go farm someone else. And so they did. Because if there's one company that are completely fine with you farming their fan base as long as you pay them, it's Games Workshop, because they don't give a shit about their fans. Steadily rising prices for less than zero effort content, buggy releases at launch, obscene balance problems. Do any of these sound familiar, Warhammer Tabletop fans? That's right, Creative Assembly has become Games Workshop. That's where we are now. Let's be honest. They've learned from the best. For decades now, Games Workshop have left most of their model range a woeful, outdated mess, and yet charge premium prices for it. Anything that is new gets a massive price hike with its new release, and above all that, the cost of Games Workshop's hobbies rise with each and every passing quarter to the point that their greed is on show for all to see. This is a company that mistreats its employees, never listens to its customer base, and instead farms PR by heavily auditing and patrolling its own Reddit pages, Twitch channels, and independent YouTube channels to ensure each of them is spreading the message that Games Workshop is a great company that sometimes makes mistakes. Does this sound familiar, Creative Assembly fans? It should do. If I had £1 for every person who came to me and told me, hey North, that's not right, at least Games Workshop listens these days, I'd have several £100. Listen closely please, Games Workshop does not listen to you. They want to appear to be listening to you. Eventually, they may make a decision that placates you every now and again. Plastic Sisters of Battle, for instance. The Squats returning, for instance. Things like that. But does any of that really matter if you cannot afford it? Games Workshop will only ever listen to your concerns after decades of you asking for something, and even then, only if it gives them more money. What does it matter if they listen to you if you can't afford the fucking hobby in the first place? The key issues of Games Workshop have always been their price rises, their toxic internal workings, their complete disregard for the gaming side of their own hobby in their own stores, and now their attempt to completely corrupt the free YouTube space, a place where once we had honest opinions, at least as often as the shills, is now populated by many who will do absolutely anything to remain in Games Workshop's good books. This is where we are, and this is where the Total War sphere has gone. When Games Workshop gives a YouTuber something early, like a box set early, and gives them an NDA to sign, one that is completely restrictive and borderline illegal in the UK, they know exactly what they are doing. They are purchasing the goodwill of that YouTuber. In other words, most people on YouTube who cover Warhammer models are unpaid PR employees of Games Workshop. Does this sound familiar to Creative Assembly fans? I could go back and forth like this all day, I really could. They are the same company these days. We used to have two wonderful British homegrown companies who made great big things that we could all enjoy. The golden age of Creative Assembly is the period for me between Rome Total War and Shogun 2, although there were amazing games before then. I'm looking at the more modern form of Creative Assembly. Whilst Games Workshop has a less defined golden age, as models are mainly subjective in nature. I think we can all agree, though, that the only time Games Workshop were really customer-facing in their approach was the early to mid and maybe late 90s. Both companies dreamed big, went public, took serious missteps, and in the end began farming and abusing their own captive communities because their fans have nowhere else to go. Think about it. If you want a Total War style game with brilliant and cinematic battles that are reactive and cool, where do you go apart from Total War? And Total War don't even give you that these days, but bear with me, right? Where do you go but Total War? There's a very good reason why the old Total War games, Rome, Shogun 2, still have massive player bases on Steam, bigger than some games that come out years after them. Even Total War games that come out years after them don't have the player base that these classic old games have. Why? Because people are craving that, and they're a captive audience. Why do you think mods like Third Age Total War, Divide and Conquer, all these other mods are huge on YouTube? Because they're a captive audience. We have nowhere else to go. If you want top-of-the-line models in a tabletop war game that is extremely popular, where else do you go but Games Workshop? Bar all the people out there who don't like reality, namely the ones who tell me Games Workshop don't make the best models on the market, touch Crash, you're fucking delusional, most of you will admit that in their respective fields, these are the only games in town. The fan base has nowhere to go. In the tabletop aspect, Games Workshop have faced some competition from other companies, and even things like one-page rules that completely break their entire model for the nonsense that it is by giving away their rules for free. The same as a lot of other companies nowadays who are taking advantage of the fact that people are getting sick of Games Workshop's bullshit. The market share, however, has barely shifted. This has a lot to do with the pandemic, giving Games Workshop a massive sales boost, whilst almost killing off its competition completely, because it could not ride out the 2020 wave of awfulness, right? A lot of Games Workshop's competitors didn't survive the pandemic, but still, the market share has only grown in Games Workshop's favour. Will the same thing befall Creative Assembly fans? No. That is because, and bear with me, that is because gaming is a different space. Not only are gamers really marshallable, you know what I mean? They do support causes. Creative Assembly are playing a dangerous game by trying to treat their fans as Games Workshop treat theirs. I firmly believe that one day, unlike Games Workshop who face competition but squash them all the time, I firmly believe that one day we will see a Total War-like game that blows Creative Assembly out of the water. Just as EA ruined SimCity, and so, were annihilated by City Skylines, one day a new option will step into this massive empty space in the gaming market and fire some serious holes into the hull of Creative Assembly. It is an inevitability at this stage, in my opinion. The two companies are not... The one place where they differ is that one. They are not the same in that way. Games Workshop crushed their competition because the actual prices and the things the barrier to entry is so massive to even compete with Games Workshop's quality, right? That nearly nobody ever tries. Nearly nobody ever tries, and those that do rapidly get squashed, or they never grow past a certain level. Rick Priestley's talked about this. If you don't know who that is, that's the guy who made Warhammer 40,000 before going on to start his own company, Warlord Miniatures. Even he has talked about this. He has said his company will never rival Games Workshop because the actual market isn't designed for it. Games Workshop is the market. They are the market share. That's it. Like, you have nowhere else to go. There are a bunch of other games out there for you to go and play, and there are people out there who will tell you that to go and play those games. I'm one of them, right? But let's be honest, in the grand scheme of things, Games Workshop's going nowhere, and it will never ever have to change, ever. Because its market share is too big and too immovable. There are other great games out there for you to go and play, but in my opinion, they will never reach Games Workshop's level of market share for that very reason. They're too big to fail. But Creative Assembly aren't. And them treating their customers like they are will lead to their downfall. We have seen recently as a few days ago, that Creative Assembly is now bleeding jobs and shedding a lot of the people who perhaps brought Creative Assembly to this pass in the first place. I can only hope that those at the company making these decisions to make large layoffs are doing so in the areas that actively need trimming and changing in the company. People losing their jobs is never something that should be celebrated. But if Creative Assembly makes cuts in the right areas to the people who assumed acting like Games Workshop would pay off, that can only be a positive. Games Workshop is a gigantic company in its own sphere. The only one of its kind, if we're honest, for its sheer size. That has a completely captive audience to nickel and dime. Those who stand up to them can likely be paid off or discredited with lies spewed from their legions of Reddit fans and YouTube shills. Creative Assembly has tried the same thing with their own community, Reddit and otherwise, with nowhere as near as a tight hold and grip of their market share that Games Workshop actually has. Even without stern competition, Creative Assembly's sheer incompetence and arrogance has led them to falling apart at the fucking seams. And that's without any stern competition. Finally, I'd like to leave you with a bit of a conspiracy theory, if I may, that I have mused on for quite a while now, since the absolute state of Pharaoh Total War, the latest historical Total War, became apparent. Pharaoh's a fucking mess, and it's shite. Right? Absolute nonsense. But hear me out. Here is my conspiracy theory. Are you ready? Creative Assembly botches historical Total War game releases on purpose. Bear with me. I know that sounds crazy, but bear with me. Because if they do so, let's look at the process of what they do when they botch an historical Total War. Number one, they dedicate very little resources to making what used to be their flagship product. As such, the product, the historical Total War game that they release, is unfinished, built in a shitty engine meant for Warhammer, and is small in scope, and almost resembles a mobile game. Step 2. As a result, historical fans, who are quite frugal with their money, don't buy into it, no matter how hard people shill for it, and sales for this game are low. Step 3. Creative Assembly can show to their investors and tell them, hey, historical games are dead, and then unveil their plans to do yet another fictional fantasy universe in the Total War landscape. The next big budget, huge Total War game, I'm telling you now, will be Westeros Total War for Game of Thrones, or Third Age Total War, despite the mod being a banger. Step 4. This leads to historical people wanting a historical Total War. So, Creative Assembly, listen, quote-unquote, to your concerns. They phone in another one, saying, hey, we tried, this one didn't sell either, and they go back to farming DLC with your next big fantasy franchise. They do it on purpose, man. They release broken, buggy, pieces of shit historical Total War games on purpose. The cycle repeats, and it has done for 5 to 10 years now. We are 10 years removed from Rome 2 Total War, and this right here has been the cycle ever since. Even with Attila, and Attila was fine. It wasn't very good, but it was better than Rome 2, but still, they phoned it in. They phoned it in, said, there you go, there's Attila. It didn't sell that well. Oh well, let's go get Warhammer. Let's go get Warhammer and do that. That's the cycle, guys. That's where we are. Pharaoh has come about now. Total War Saga Troy came about. Total War Saga Britannia came about. None of them sold very well. They gave away Troy for free. For free. Nobody does that if they take their game seriously. They gave it away, and people celebrated it like, oh, isn't that great? Oh, thank you, CA. You gave away Troy for free. They gave it away for free because they don't give a fuck, and they know it's a pile of shite. That's why they gave it away for free. They will do anything for positive feedback at this stage. I'm telling you now, man. Total War is dead. It's dead. It's gone. It's gone. Unless we see a massive U-turn, it's gone. This is what I meant when I said Creative Assembly is a corpse being puppeted by people with very, very nefarious and greedy intentions for its innovations and market share. When someone, anyone of skill, steps into this space even with a fraction of a Warhammer budget, they will blow Creative Assembly out of the water. The thing is that a good thing? I want the old Creative Assembly back. I want the passionate Creative Assembly. I want the Rome Total War Creative Assembly that was obsessed with history and massive tactical reactive battles that relied on the skill of the general more than anything else. I honestly think Rome 2 traumatized CA away from historical titles. 10 years ago, Rome 2 dropped, and because of the Creative Assembly atmosphere and inner workings changing to be more corporate, it was a fucking mess. An absolute mess. And it's traumatized CA away from historical Total Wars. And since then, they've never even tried. They've never tried. Historical Total War has always been the ugly stepchild since then. It's you guys. It's Warhammer. You should be the ugly stepchild. We were here first. We built this fucking house. And you turned it into a brothel. Go fuck yourselves. I love Warhammer. I love Warhammer. But I'm telling you now, you should be the ugly stepchildren here. Not us. Historical Total War people should be the bread and butter of this company. And we should be feeding it money. Here's some more money for your amazing Total War games. Thank you for making them. But we can't. Because they're determined to nickel and dime Games Workshop people. That's why. And then they'll move on to Tolkien, and then they'll move on to Game of Thrones. It's coming down the line. It's coming down the line. You know it is. A company that wrote the book. So, this is what I mean. I honestly think Rome 2 traumatized CA away from historical titles and into the arms of Games Workshop. A company that wrote the fucking book on how not to treat your fans and has done for decades. Creative Assembly, I hope the changes you are making are bringing you back to your roots, or at least starting that trend, because if they are not, I am afraid we won't be seeing you or your games around for much longer. That's my rant for the day, guys. I'm sorry it wasn't more hobby focused, but I had to get this off my chest. It's something I'm incredibly passionate about. The three main things in my gaming sphere, right, are history, Total War, and Warhammer. Those are my things. And I was built to like Warhammer Total War. I was built to like it, but I don't. I don't. Because it strips away something that I love. And I always have done and always will do. If you want nostalgia, if you want to feel that buzz, go back and play Medieval 2. Go back and play Shogun 2. Go back and play Rome Total War. Go and play those games and tell me you don't feel it deep down in your waters that this is how it's supposed to be. I love you all a long time. I'll speak to you tomorrow for some more hobby nightmares. I'll see you then. Have a good one. Bye now.